Welcome to another exciting interview today. We are thrilled to have a gentleman that is spending his Friday evening, or maybe it's Saturday over there, in Indonesia with us, the world-renowned British gentleman with the cool goatee and the soft bottom feet, Damo Mitchell. Damo, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you very much. I wouldn't rather be doing anything else on a Friday night. I'm honored to be able to sit here chatting with you guys. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So the first question we ask everybody, I know you do a great job of it on your show, but if you would share it with our audience, tell us your origin story. Tell us the Planet Krypton story of Damo Mitchell.
Origin story sounds like sort of get it mixed up with my villain story or something, won't I? But yeah. So well, in brief, my family were martial arts practitioners. They actually ran a martial arts organization, so I kind of grew up around this. It was Japanese martial arts as well as boxing from my uncle, and a few other bits and pieces, some yoga in there as well. But I've always grown up around these arts. So I just kind of followed in the family footsteps from when I was a kid and did what everybody does who doesn't know what to do with their life, do what the parents did, basically. So there was no great inspiration or rationale behind the arts. And I didn't really like them. I wasn't really into martial arts. When I was younger, it was just, like some kids are forced to play the piano and things like this. That's how martial arts felt for me. And then I guess in my early teens, it's probably safe to say. Yeah, probably that long. In my early teens, I kind of found a love for the arts finally. But I realized that what I was studying, the Japanese arts, weren't really my first love. And actually, I was becoming fascinated by lots of the stories of the Buddhists and the Taoists and Kung Fu masters, things like this. So I started to pursue Chinese martial arts alongside it. And originally, it was whatever I could find in the local town. It ended up being every single night of the week. I was at a different style and a different class. I ended up wading through too many martial arts systems and find what I loved. And then eventually I realized that the style didn't matter as much as the teacher. I didn't really it didn't matter. I had to find somebody I was inspired by. So although my family had been inspiring, like nobody wants to be doing what their parents do forever, do they? Or study with them. So I eventually met a Chinese guy named Shen Hongzhen, and I studied with him and his family for a while. I tried to keep this brief. It's been a lot of years. And then actually he passed away. So I was looking for a new teacher. So then I went to Asia. I went there with a plan of being planning on a few months. I can't remember exactly, a few months. Ended up being nearly 20 years now. Or something like that I've been here. So I don't know, it kept extending. So my background these days is Chinese martial arts, particularly Taiji, Bagua are the main things that I've studied. A little bit of Xingyi, but I would say it's definitely not pure Xingyi. It was modified to match the Bagua Zhang. So I would never claim to be a purist in Xingyi Chuan at all. And then from there, I developed a love of Nei Gong and Nei Dan because of the people I met. And those are really my main passion these days. Martial arts are a hobby that keep me fit, fitish. Well, sort of fit. I've disappeared down a route of alchemical practice and Qigong these days. So I think that pretty much sums up what I've been doing. Some other stuff in the middle, bit of Chinese medicine, but yeah, that's me, basically.
Beautiful. Is there any, the gentleman that you found over there, what did he teach? And have you kept anything from his teachings at all? Your first Chinese teacher.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was Shen Hongzhen was a controversial character in the Chinese arts over here. Very esoteric, I guess. Woo-woo is the term that people use these days. So definitely captured my interest as a teenager, because when you're a teenage boy, anything like that's fascinating, isn't it? So he was kind of my first taste of something a little bit deeper than body movements. Definitely a part of what I do, but I transferred over to other teachers, Wang Haitao and other people, and sort of branched out. I did that usual thing that people do, like coming to China, where I lived for years, and then Southeast Asia was like suddenly having a smorgasbord of all the arts available to you. And so I just went on this sort of mad greed period, I would say, where I just sort of consumed everything I possibly could and ended up with a big mess, and then ended up refining it back down to a few different systems. There was a period in time where I was studying everything and getting nowhere. But these days, focused very much in on just a few systems. But yeah, I would say that, I think people are being dishonest if they don't admit to themselves or others that every teacher they've ever had is a part of what they do. I don't think you can ever claim that if you studied with A, you're only doing A system. I mean, I've had multiple teachers, like many people have, and I'm sure they've all influenced me to a large degree, which is, my view of why being a purist is a little bit of an impossibility if you've traveled around a bit and things like this. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We joke that we're hybrids, that we've studied so many different types of martial arts over time, and some of it soaks into your system and some of it you get rid of, but eventually it's just, you end up kind of having a bit of a hybrid type system in your body as it evolves.
I think that's inevitable, isn't it? I mean, I don't see why people pretend that that's not the case. I also think that, your art and your art, you guys, I mean, what is presented from your body when you're moving and when you're doing things is the fruit of your studies, isn't it? And that's the beauty of these arts, that you're creating something new within yourself. So while we almost must stick to the principles as cleanly as we've been taught them, there's always going to be an expression, like my art is, internal arts expressed through a bit of an idiot Englishman in his 40s. Like, that's how they're going to be expressed, and nothing else is going to change that.
Oh, I love it. That's great. That's great.
You guys are, you guys are Bagua practitioners primarily, or? Right.
Yeah, I primarily do Bagua and Xingyi. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Great.
Mm-hmm. So I'll give you the micro story. I've done, and I still teach, I've done, almost 27 years of Wing Chun. And 13 years ago, I was going through a dark period, and I had a good friend of mine kind of reach out through the force. Yeah. And he's like, hey, there's this great guy here in Boulder, and he's teaching Xingyi and Bagua, and that's Mr. Owen Schilling over there. And he's like, why don't you come down and try it out? And about the 5th class of Xingyi, I was hooked. It's so interesting. I'll give you this 2 cents, Damo, because you were talking the other day. I was listening on one of your podcasts. You're talking about how some people think Xingyi is just linear, and you're like, there's some roundness to it. Coming from Wing Chun and doing Owen Xingyi, I'm like, oh my God, it's just this big round ball. And then the last 2 years, I finally endeavored. He's like, hey, you know how your Xingyi has helped your movement and helped your back? Because my daily 9 to 5 is a bus driver. He's like, do you know how it's helped your joints and all these other things? I'm like, yeah. He's like, well, Bagua is going to take that to the next level. And so I'm a Bagua reluctant, but it does help my daily life and my Xingyi practice and my Wing Chun. So I am grateful to Owen for that.
You've got the whole spectrum there then. Linear, direct style through to Bagua, which goes all over the place with the Xingyi in the middle. Good spectrum, I think. Yeah.
That's it. That's it, my friend. That's it. What is Lotus Nei Gong up to these days? It's gone through a transitional phase. And maybe I'm jumping to something that we wanted to talk about later, but I just got off, listening to one of your episodes, and you have gone through such a dramatic change for your own practice, for how you teach. Would you tell us about that and where Lotus Nei Gong is going these days?
Yeah, sure. You're talking about the sort of anniversary talk I was doing the other day. I was lost in a weird moment of nostalgia there for some reason. I think 20 years of teaching hit me. I suddenly realized how old I was, and I disappeared down a rabbit hole there. Yeah, the transition you're talking about was the most problematic one within my school, really, because I used to be a very dogmatic traditionalist, exactly what I'm not now. So I had this weird obsession with lineage for a long time when I was younger. So I did. I was initiated into lineage, Longmen Pai and things like this, and sort of went down that route. So I was very fascinated by all that and Chinese culture and everything associated with it. And then still nothing wrong with that. I just, during COVID particularly, I just realized it wasn't me. And I just had this sudden desire to shed the lot of it. And very much the teachers I have now are about this as well. They don't like the old sort of trimmings. So while I have no problem with it, I just kind of stepped away from it and started to realize that what mattered to me was the causative chain of the practice. The practice creates an outcome, and there is the conditions of who you are into the mix as well. But none of the trimmings mattered to me. So I had this weird sort of experience where I came back into my school, I guess, after a couple of years off or something like that, when everything shut down and went haywire. And just people could tell straight away that it was just different. And a lot of people didn't like it. So within the school, a lot of people who were there for the tradition got quite annoyed with me. And I think it's better they left, actually, because they were there for the wrong thing. I mean, if you want tradition, don't go to a white English guy. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. So there was a sort of shedding in the school like this. And I found my own way within these arts. And I would say that now somewhere I float around, I don't know. I mean, the exercises I teach are not changed. The practices are not changed, but I just don't have any of the trimmings or culture around it at all these days. So I'm very much a pragmatist. And it's funny because it's actually caused a problem in the wider community as well, because I've discovered all of the, what would you call them, sort of traditional Taoists, classical Taoists, I don't know, ones who are very interested in all that, Chinese language, culture, Gucci and tea, outfits, all that kind of stuff. They really are quite annoyed at me as well at the moment. It's been like a red rag to a bull to them, which I find quite funny, because when I don't mind, but when I see them talking and doing things, it just reminds me of how I felt about 8 or 9 years ago. It's like a different transitional phase. So I'll be interested to see if they go through a similar transitional phase in the future. It was easy for me, though, because I don't have a great love of Chinese culture. And it just suddenly dawned on me during COVID. I suddenly realized I have no interest in it. I don't like the art. I'm not into the music. I'm just not into it. Actually, I'm far more into cowboy culture in America, to be perfectly honest. I'm a bit of a redneck at heart. So I don't know. It just all had to fall away. But I think that's an important part for me personally of my transformation. But who knows? Maybe another few years I'll be back into Chinese teas and Gucci, and I'm not sure. We'll see. Maybe.
That's awesome. Thank you. I laugh because, we're from Colorado, so we're kind of in the middle of the United States, and my family's been in this part of the United States for over 100 years. So we've got a lot of cowboy culture, in my family. So that's why I laugh. I was like, I get it.
I really like Colorado as well. Very beautiful. I drove around up actually during COVID. I came over there for a few months in the mountains in Colorado and really loved it there. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, we're right outside of Boulder. We're about 15 miles outside of Boulder. Yeah. And so I drive the city bus around in Boulder. And I will tell you that there's a little bit of country left. We're still growing as a population, and it's becoming steel buildings and concrete. But yeah, Owen and I can walk out our respected apartments and houses, and there's a field. We actually live pretty close to each other. We don't tell the audience that too much, but there's a field of horses just right outside.
That's true.
There you go.
Yeah, very much so.
That's the way.
So as a kind of a follow-on question to what you were talking about before in terms of this idea of the in your practice and within your school of sort of separating this idea of culture and tradition from your actual practice, I wanted to ask you about the languaging around that. So, I know that, say my teacher, he lived in Taiwan for 10 or 12 years and he spoke fluent Chinese, and, he was able to translate a lot of the material that he brought back in order to teach us. But he would he was also a Chinese medical doctor, and he had, there were certain terms which he from time to time had difficulty relating in English, sort of conceptually and from a linguistic point. And one of my favorites is the Dantian. There's not really a really great equivalent in Western language and Western medicine. So I was going to ask, how do you bridge that gap? Do you stick with Chinese terminology, or have you developed some new nomenclature around that, or?
No, not at all. I stay with the Chinese terms. For me, stepping away from all of the trimmings didn't mean dropping the terminology, not at all.
Okay.
Because I thought that if the arts were passed on with that terminology through the traditions, then that, who am I to question such things? But I do have a very Western, I guess, way of explaining the dantian to people according to the art. No, I'm still very classical in the way I teach. I guess I'll tell you what it is. Let me explain this. Oh, how am I going to do this without sounding really, whatever. If it's problematic, it's problematic. I think that there is an issue that I can recognize in myself when I was younger, where I had a kind of inferiority complex because I was a white guy doing these arts. Mm-hmm. So it's like you're doing the arts, but it's like the Chinese are pedestaled or something. And I kind of remember it from in the Japanese arts in the 80s, though, when I was very young, there was still that kind of attitude, and it gradually sort of dropped away a little bit. There was a lot of sort of Japanese worship. And I think in the Chinese arts, it's still very prevalent. So when I was meeting Westerners who were in China or Southeast Asia studying, and also within myself and then within my own students, I could see that it's like a barrier. Like if you see yourself as inferior because you're not from a particular culture or something like this, that's obviously a barrier to progression with regards to yourself. So it's hard for me to explain exactly, but I guess the transition away from it is partially deliberate, so that if I'm going to teach Western people, that they recognize that inherently they are capable of doing all of the same things no matter what culture that they are from. So it almost became a very deliberate tool. So if I were to be a little critical in the nicest possible way I can, I saw and I still see that some of the people that are still within the the traditions of the lineage, that have the outfits, have the sort of adopt culture from somewhere else, they hold themselves back. And I see that their skill level is kind of restricted because they've pedestaled everybody else. And that's why I think it's a problem. So I didn't drop the terminology. I still use it. But I guess that I have an irreverence when I teach to anything like this. And I mean, I joke and swear and cuss all the way through my classes, and everybody's laughing. And that is my attitude towards the teaching, so that people realize there's nothing sacred in the culture that it came from. It's simply a tool. And if these arts have been developed in, I don't know, Belgium, they still would have worked. It doesn't matter. It's just that it so happens that's the culture that preserved it. So hope I've explained that okay, but I would still maintain the traditional teaching. So Qi is obviously a larger part of what we do, and concepts such as Song, I do not translate in, I do not change to English words or dantian or anything. I'm still very clean on all of that, as far as I can anyway. But I do have, I think everything can be translated into English for sure. Sometimes it just takes a lot of words. Unpacking a zip file for people to understand.
Sure.
How about you guys? Are you very traditional in your approach? Or classical?
No.
Well, Boulder is super arty, so I'd imagine it's quite expressive what you're doing.
Yeah, I definitely haven't adopted a lot of those Boulder trappings in terms of my practice, because I think that's more the sort of long hair and flowing robes crowd. I think that there's a big market for that here. If one was to come here and to have that and sort of present in that way, I think that there's and you were going to market yourself as a Wu-Dang Taoist or a Shaolin monk or something like that, then there's definitely a market for that.
Right. Yes.
So so I don't go in for much of that. I'm much more, and I'm really interested in this idea of sort of where the line is in terms of sort of culture and tradition and sort of this Western mindset in terms of teaching. And I was going to ask you, I know that traditionally a lot of like Chinese teachers and their curriculums are, maybe not disorganized, but maybe they're presented in a disorganized way or taught in a disorganized way.
Woo.
And one of the things that I really found very refreshing, sort of about your books, and then definitely about your presence online and all of the things you put out. And thank you for that, by the way. That's a great resource. How did you go about starting to organize these things? So, with your extensive background and you have all this experience with all these different teachers, was it more organic that it sort of evolved over time, or did you have something kind of a skeleton from the beginning and you fleshed it out, or how did that come about?
Yeah, no. So I think that what I would say is, whilst I have never adjusted a form or an exercise or a drill from any system, one thing I have done is take them apart so that when I teach, say I'm going to teach somebody a drill, I will teach it in a very broken down step-by-step process that normally goes the same, which is basically from physical gross mechanical movements through to subtler control of the inside, through to energetics, through to putting the whole exercise together. So maybe the only thing that I would maybe claim some kind of dodgy credit for is that I tried to reverse engineer how some of the exercises work so that I could teach them step by step by step. And I have found, it's been fairly successful. If I have, my experience of training in Asia is if there's 20 people training, maybe 2 people get it, and the other 18 look confused. And maybe with the population density of China, maybe that works. You just sort of high numbers study and I don't know, but, I would say that actually if I were to blow my own trumpet at all, I would say that maybe I've increased the percentage of people that can get a hold of the exercises, that can grab it by just breaking it down. And I unpacked it by just sort of working out what was the process I needed to go through. And my view is you need to go through dense, large movements first and then gradually compact it down into the sort of final result, really. So I'm a very linear person, and I'm a very spade as a spade, kind of honest simpleton. So I like it to be laid out like this, and that's probably the input I've had to the systems as much as anything. And maybe that's bad to do, but I was tired of when I started teaching watching everyone not being able to understand. So it's something to change.
Yeah. And do you think that is? I'm not sure how to ask this, but I'm wondering if that's more sort of like the Western mindset, that we want to kind of have a framework. We kind of want to have that linear delineation in progress applied to, more of a Chinese method, or do you think that there's something else?
I think it's probably what you're saying. I think the Western mind is probably, it suits a little bit more. But increasingly I have a lot of Chinese students and students from around parts of Asia, and they like it as well. So maybe rather than Eastern and Western, it's kind of classical and modern. Who knows? Maybe.
Sure. Maybe I like that. I like that.
That's nice. I was going to ask, and sort of piggyback on a little bit off that last question, and sort of as your understanding of Chinese internal martial arts and the mechanisms involved in those arts evolved, did it affect or take you deeper into your Nei Dan practice? So I was sort of wondering about that impact.
Yeah, for sure. I think that my main lever, like I said at the beginning, is alchemy as Nei Dan, because I encountered this system that is, as far as I can make out, I'll never manage. It was like, right, this is mission impossible. I may as well study this, and see where I get to. And I get very absorbed in it. But much of the body transformation work from internal martial arts and even external martial arts, if we separate the two at all, was highly useful for alchemy. I have an opinion that it might be difficult to get very far in alchemy without a background in internal martial arts, because it's such a complex and intricate system based on so much subtlety, and internal martial arts feel like they've kind of extrapolated that out into a big sort of mechanical way that gives you a somatic feedback. So I think in internal martial arts, were very, very useful for that. That's why when people come to study within the school I run, even if they come for alchemy, which is probably what I'm known most for, is Qigong or alchemy more than anything else, I still try to encourage them to do at least a foundation in martial arts first. Also qualities of mind, to be perfectly honest. I think that in meditative practice particularly, people underestimate the importance of being able not only to make the mind go quiet, but to make the mind go sometimes as well into a sort of sharp tool. And martial arts are incredibly good for that. Forgive it, as you know, I'm sure from what you're doing, that mindset, which sometimes, something comes up and you could watch it and look for the inherent emptiness underneath that thought. Sometimes you just cut it, just use a little bit of a brutal mindset to cut it out the way, because life's only so long and we got stuff to do. So I think martial arts are very important for that. Yeah. But these days, martial arts are very much like I say, they're a hobby. I'm still teaching them every day. I mean, this morning was 3 hours of Tai Chi teaching, because that's what the people I'm teaching require to do. But for myself, it's secondary. It's secondary. Yeah. Once I encountered alchemy, I realized that actually, okay, this is where my heart lie. And if I'd have found it when I was younger, I also would have loved it. I just wouldn't have been able to do it. So I'm glad I found it when I did. Yeah.
And you were talking a little bit there about sort of the mind quality involved with, different, like training in internal martial arts and then in Nei Gong practice. And I was wondering if because the not internal martial arts, but martial arts in general have kind of a different mindset, they can have a different mindset, maybe more towards violence. And is there, or maybe you could say it's like a tenacity of some sort, and does that have a negative impact on the Nei Gong practice to develop that type of mindset, or are they more complementary?
I think so. I mean, I have an opinion on the internal martial arts that I'm not sure they have the same. I mean, I think I'm in the minority on this. With regards to the current sort of martial arts scene. And I'm more than happy to be told I'm incorrect on this. But think of it like this, right? Say you study something external, a very external style. Everybody, when you say an external style, they say their style is internal. But say we say something that's definitely external, and you've studied this kung fu for years and years and years. Okay, and when you started, you were interested in combat. So it was all about practicality and developing that mindset to take out an opponent as fast as possible. Well, at some point you get older, and then you realize that actually what's going to kill me is a heart attack, or maybe my joints are knackered or my back's given out. And actually this is more likely to finish me off than a mugger or something like that. So therefore your priorities change. And by this time you've been training 30 years or something like that. And then all of a sudden you discover this other thing on the inside, like, oh, there's a way that my mind can interact with my body. And maybe there's a subtle aspect to it that's not so logical. And then gradually your training evolves, and then, hey presto, you get an internal martial art. You see what I mean? It strikes me as an evolution of a very skilled martial artist. Like Tai Chi. Tai Chi is being created by somebody who's already been through the ringer, very clearly. Like it's been developed by somebody very, very advanced in martial arts. Now, my experience of balanced, centered people is after a certain amount of years in the martial arts, you're not so interested in fighting anymore. So I wonder if Tai Chi, Bagua, Xingyi ever really had that kind of aggressive mindset behind them. Do you get what I mean? Like they may have been used for combat, and they definitely have a practical aspect to them. No denying that. I mean, some of the applications of it are quite brutal. But there's also another aspect to it that I don't know, man. All right, I sounded like a total hippie here. I think that when you go deep enough into a form, say a sequence, a palm change or a Tai Chi form or something, I think you can almost feel the essence of the person that created that form. Like you can almost, I can kind of sense their personality or where they were coming from or something like that. And if I spend a long time, say, doing a long fist form or even a Wing Chun form or something, I can pick out a different identity in the person who created this from the Yang style long form or something, or the Xiaohao medium frame form or something. There's a different vibe to it. So I actually find that the mindset in the internal martial arts is a little different and more conducive with meditation maybe than external martial arts. Hope that made sense. Maybe that was a rambling answer. So I've never found that kind of conflict in the internal martial arts with regards to the mindset. I mean, as an example, I did a lot of scrapping when I was younger because I enjoyed it, and I was a feisty little shitbag with a big mouth. Some things never changed. So I I do a lot of fighting and sparring, and you could feel like an adrenaline and a rage and anger come up in me. And I very much had that. As I went further in, and then into Tuisho, push hands, and then into sparring with Tai Chi, like every photo you ever see of me doing anything with a student, I've got a big grin on my head. It's like, it doesn't matter. Whilst I'm knocking to the floor and they're knocking me to the floor, it makes me happy. There's a different mindset that is almost contradictory. It's like, I'm fighting you, but I'm in a really good mood and I've got nothing against you. And that mindset, I think, goes very, very well with alchemy, as far as I can see. But I'm aware that I'm probably in the minority for that. A lot of people want the internal martial arts to be these badass killer things, but I just don't see that as the mindset of the person that formulated them, personally. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you.
Would you have any? I'm curious if you have similar thoughts or a different take on it, because I'm always interested in other people's view on the same thing.
I'll pop on that. I'll pop on that bandwagon. I just worked with a gentleman out of Casper, Wyoming, which is about a 4-hour drive from here, and it was lovely. His group was fantastic. They primarily do an Okinawan style of karate. I think it's a Shorin-ryu method. They do eskrima, and they do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. And I had a moment where I taught for about 3 or 4 hours. We had a little break. We had some lunch, and we sat around and talked. And they're like, hey, could you do the first forms of Wing Chun, Bagua, and Xingyi for us?
Okay.
So
no
I showed them Sunam Tao.
Okay.
I showed them pt1, and then I showed them the single palm change. And one of the kids in the audience made me laugh. He was like, if I didn't know those were Chinese martial arts, I would say they were from different planets, because
yes,
I don't see how those forms can be from the same country. And I thought that was a fascinating observation from a young person. Sunam Tao, you're in the, as they call it, the Yiji Kim Yin Ma, or the goat catching stance. And, you're working on your stance and you're developing the posture and the arms are working. So it's almost like and this riles feathers when I say this on the podcast. It's almost like a jibangong, What are you working on? Well, you can't just work on the hands. You have to work on what's holding up the frame itself. And then, pt1, it's on the line, and they got a chuckle out of that one because they're used to the 30 to 100 move katas.
Yes.
And I'm like, it's 3 moves. It's these 3 moves on this side, and then it presents the other side forward. And it's these 3 moves on this side. And I'm like, and if I had the breath and if there was oxygen and space and I had the stamina, I could do this form to the moon. I could turn around and come back and do it all the way back to earth. And so that was intriguing for them because they were so used to a sequence of long movements that really had no connection to them. So I do believe that maybe there is a mind capacity that develops with the forms. And it's fascinating too, because, the way I was taught Wing Chun, my teacher has a PhD in educational psychology and cognitive development. And he's like, these are problem solving forms. So why don't you use them as a problem solving tool? And so when you go in with that mindset, you're going to look at the forms completely differently than it's like, oh, when they do this, you do that. When they do this, you do that. So it's just a different mental approach to get the mind inside of the body and recognize what the movements can accomplish, I guess. I don't know. That might be a long-winded explanation that didn't go anywhere, but that's my thoughts on that.
No, I'm actually a big fan of that. That sounds like a really good mindset for martial arts as a problem-solving thing, but because it sounds like something that opens up your thought processes and changes who you are in a more healthy direction. The stuff that I find a little limiting is when it's all about kill your opponent as fast as you possibly can, which I don't always think is the healthiest mindset to carry around in your brain on a day-to-day basis when you go into Walmart or whatever. It's not going to be great for you. So I think that's a great way to approach the arts personally.
So it kind of a follow up to what we were talking about here. I was going to ask you, what direction sort of internal martial arts in general, and maybe to a certain extent, like your Neidan practice, like what direction do you see it going in the future, or, what role can it play in like personal development, like a person's own development? And is that, is that evolving, or, is it sort of predetermined? Hopefully you can go in this particular direction. I just wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that from my own personal perspective, I would say that I'm mostly got no idea where it's going. I'm following it to see where it ends up. I know that I started as a fairly angry and obnoxious teenager and have evolved into something hopefully a little bit different from that. The one thing that surprised me is in many ways it's maybe quite religious, which has been a shock to people who knew me from when I was younger. And I don't mean religious in a very organized religious way. I don't feel like I'm part of any organized hierarchical structure, but it definitely has so far brought me a connection, dare I say, to soul and something divine. Even if I can only just kind of touch the very peripheries of it, I can feel there's something deeper. So as cheesy as it may sound, my arts, once I realized they had maybe the potential for such things, this is what they have become about. So in a way, my practice has moved from a martial arts practice and a way of, understanding how to move energy through the body and do partnership with people into a way for me to find some kind of deeper meaning in life and perhaps my own religious practice, I would say. Mm-hmm. Which almost sounds counter to what I was saying about moving away from tradition, but it's not really, because it's very personal to me. So when I teach, that's not a part of my teaching at all, and I don't discuss such things. I would simply encourage people to develop the tools and wherever it leads them on their path, more power to them. So I guess the other side to it is that alchemy particularly does have very specific aims, very specific outcomes that are discussed. But I think they may be a little bit further from what I'll ever achieve. So I'm happy wandering down this path to see where it goes. Go on, sorry.
No, please. No, I was just going to ask, do you see those outcomes as being more, and I know I'm going to create a very overly simple idea here, and please feel free to shoot it down. But do you see those outcomes as being more sort of Taoist in nature, or maybe Buddhist in nature, or something else, or something in between?
Well, I don't even, this might sound odd, I don't even know what Taoism or Buddhism mean anymore. I sort of hit this point a few years ago where, I was initiated into a Chan tradition, and I spent a long time with the Dragon Gate sect, and somewhere in the skeletons of my closet, I actually did a little bit of priest training in China years ago. So I should have an idea, but I hit this question during the COVID era of, is something what it was or what it is? So you take Taoism. Is Taoism what it was when it was founded by, legendary Lao Tzu or the people who came after, or the alchemical traditions? Or is Taoism what it is now, which is usually represented by perhaps Wudang Mountain or some of the Qingqian Shan or something like that, or some of these organizations? Because I feel it's evolved and transformed quite a lot. And if it is what it is now, then I don't feel much alignment with Taoism particularly. So and the same with Buddhism, right? So I ended up in this position that, much as I think that they're very wise traditions and the teachers from it are very profound, I don't think they serve me personally any function right now, any usefulness. So if you get what I mean,
I got something for you, Damo. I got something. So Owen, listening to his questions and then listening to what you've said before, I call it the on-the-spot question. It sounds like what you're talking about is something living and breathing versus something in a history book. And it sounds like you're talking about spirituality in your own practice versus religion. Do you have the right robes? Are you wearing the right shirt to church on Sunday? That sounds a little bit like what you're talking about, not only with the school and where it's transitioned from, away from, do you have the right hat on? Are you eating the right herbs? To, how does this benefit your life? How does this benefit my students? How does this, those kind of practical, workable tools. Is that too far of a stretch?
No, I think that's very true. And I think on a spiritual level, whether you're Hindu, Buddhist, Christian, Islamic, I don't know, any of these things, I believe that everybody has a being and a soul and a spirit and a potential for connection to the divine. And it doesn't really matter what traditional language is used, because that potential is stored within each and every one of us. So that's why the traditions became a hurdle in the end, because they become a set of languages that creates a conceptual framework that limits. So while I think that the systems produce, especially the Chinese systems, very, very efficient and effective exercise to create a causative change, I just don't think the frameworks are required. It's like the trainer wheels have to drop off, and then you can really sort of explore what the meaning of all this is. And not that I, please don't misunderstand and think I mind any of the sort of friction on the internet. It doesn't bother me at all. I'm old enough where I was brought up in an age where the internet didn't really exist. So therefore, when I see things on the internet, it's not even real to me. So it never has any impact. But it's been interesting seeing how contentious that view is from people that are still very, or have chosen to be very caught up in those traditions. So even people that I had a very good working relationships with in the past, once they realized that I didn't really align with Taoism anymore, there was, you can see like a discomfort, like an annoyance that's there, like you've, what do you call it? Apostated? Is that the word? Or when you leave the tradition? Yeah. Right. And I saw that from, lots of people in the internal martial arts. But I will say that I tend to draw into the school naturally people who also want to do the exercises without any of the other stuff around it, the Taoism or the Buddhism particularly. But full respect to the people who came from those traditions. You know, Buddha wasn't a Buddhist, but he definitely knew what he was talking about. So I would never talk negative of those traditions. They're not serving me at this time, I think.
Here's an odd question for you. I know you have a lot of longtime students or folks that'll come and train with you for months and weeks at a time, and you've had people that have been with you for years. Let's say that, somebody was, just your average Joe or Jane, and they needed something different in their life. They had a 9-to-5 job. They're a blue collar person, but they've hit a wall with everything. Maybe their spiritual practice isn't working. Lifting weights isn't doing it for them anymore. And they had a month to come spend with you. What could your practice change for somebody that has a 9-to-5 job? That's somebody that's willing to come to you and try something different. What would you hope for that student? Because, the longtime students, you've got the longtime package, which I want to talk about your longtime students, because I found it fascinating that you talked about you're going to start a lot of external stuff. If you're staying with me for a while, I'm starting you in the external to move to the internal. I found that beautiful and fascinating. But if they have a month to spend with you, what do you think somebody that faces the 9-to-5, that has a family, that has kids, do you think your teachings can offer that to a student like that? Something.
Yeah. I mean, within the school, we have a bit of everything. We have the obsessive fanatics, and then we have people that are putting the practice around their life, of course. So there is a spectrum there. I would say that if somebody is studying for a month or coming backwards and forwards doing short term, then they should focus on a smaller aspect of the syllabus. That's just sensible. But my start point for everybody is the Dantian. It doesn't matter what they're doing, whether you are doing Qigong or whether you're doing internal martial arts, and people can choose what they want to study. For me, the Dantian. So somebody who comes for a month, the mission pretty much is to help them to form and activate and awaken the Dantian and get the Qi to move through their body, because then they have access to something that's going to transform many things in their life and bring them a huge amount of benefit. And a month is very realistic to do such a thing, like very easy. Within a couple of weeks, perhaps people will start to get a feel for it. The vehicle through which we do that, whether it might be Qigong or something else, doesn't really matter to me. It's the outcome of forming this. So I think if I have a mission for people to come short term, that's that, because then they have a battery they can charge up within the abdomen, and we show them how to use it and how to build this energy within the body. And actually, when I decided to do that, that ended up being what most people came for. It got a bit of a name, a bit of a reputation that we can actually get this thing to build inside the body quite effectively from an alchemical point of view. So I kind of start there. And then once that's formed, it's up to people. I mean, it's a very organic school. If I know you and we've had a conversation, then you can come and go as you see fit. And we try to be as accommodating as we can. And then people will build their art around that initial step, really. So that's kind of where I start with people. Oh, and line them up a bit. A lot of people's bodies are a bit out of line, aren't they? So trying to make them comfortable in their body is a good start point. Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you.